based on that well-known childhood myth where a child is worried that there are monsters hiding in the bedroom closet. The movie Monsters, Inc. envisions this world called Monstropolis, where they employ the scariest monsters to sneak into the bedrooms of children at night and to scare them, and they take those screams and harness them, creating energy for the city. It is diabolical. But this work is considered dangerous for the monsters because they believe in the myth that children are toxic, that any direct contact with a child is to be avoided at all costs. Well, this animated film with impeccable comedic timing explores the rising concern of an energy crisis in Monstropolis, that children are just not scared as easily as they used to be. And one monster gets desperate. He creates this new invention called the Scream Extractor, where they would kidnap children and force them to scream into this invention, harnessing more energy. The two main characters are Sully and Wazowski, who are the top scarers at the Scream Company. And one day they accidentally let a child into Monstropolis, and they affectionately call her Boo. They come to care for Boo. They realize she is not toxic. And they're worried because they fear if someone discovers her presence in Monstropolis, they will use the Scream Extractor on her. Well, one day Sully accidentally scares Boo. And it's the first time he's ever scared a child that he cared about. And he is left feeling completely empty, seeing the errors of his ways. But then this story is flipped upside down when Wazowski makes Boo laugh. And they discover that a child's laugh is 10 times more powerful than a child's scream. That when Boo giggles, the energy meter just flies off the charts. They eventually return Boo home. And the Scream Company changes its business plan. They now go into the business of making children laugh, solving the energy crisis in Monstropolis. In our world, which is permeated by fear, tragedy, and bad news, it is easy to underestimate the power of joy, love, and gratitude. We witness that good news can spread throughout the world in the book of Acts. It's why we are here this morning, because it says that the good news spread even to Gentiles. And a Gentile was anybody who was not Jewish, that we are Gentiles. So we are so thankful that God's love does not show partiality. But bad news can also spread like a weed. And bad news can feel heavier and weightier, and if we are not careful, we can be consumed by it, that we can lose sight of Easter in the lingering shadows of Good Friday. During the pandemic, when we were all isolated from one another and everything was shut down, and it seemed like every single headline was just dripping with bad news. The actor John Krasinski started this impromptu news show called Some Good News, where he just collected and curated good news stories and shared them with others. There were stories about dedicated frontline workers, stories about families celebrating, even apart from one another, as a loved one would ring the bell after a final cancer treatment. Stories about virtual graduations and virtual hugs through the window pane of an assisted living home. And as I watched those stories, I found myself rediscovering the importance of good news. Not because it makes us feel good, but because it hints at the steadfast love of God at work in this world. That it doesn't erase the bad news, but it does help us see beyond it. That good news is a protest against bad news. For Easter will not let us settle for bad news. But it's not always easy to see. It's far easier to see danger and destruction than it is to notice what is life-giving. It is, as the poem by Laura Martin, The Harder Way, says. It's easier to preach despair than resurrection. It's easier to destroy than to create. It's easier to curse than to honor. Choose the harder way. Choose the way where dry bones rattle than find breath. Choose the way where empty springs become living water, where the lost sheep is carried home. Choose the way of creation in your hands. Choose the way of healing what is broken using whatever you have. Choose the way of seeing the seed that is yet to grow. Sing to what you do not understand. Go back and look again and find the tomb empty and you part of the rising. When Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Salome, got up this morning and walked to the tomb with spices in hand, they expected to find a body. Spices were used as an act of devotion at burial. And their primary concern as they talked to one another along the way was, how are we going to move that large stone over the entrance of the tomb? That it would have been a heavy stone. Far easier to roll into place than to remove, because once it was rolled into place, it would have fallen into this pre-cut groove in the rock. But when they arrived, the stone had already been rolled away. And they heard this voice say, "Do not be afraid. Jesus is not here. He has been raised. You will see him as he told you. Go and tell the others." They came with spices in hand, and they left with good news. All of the world's problems were not fixed in an instant, but Easter was not finished. You probably noticed that the Gospel of Mark ends rather abruptly. That in the very earliest manuscripts of Mark, we have what we call the shorter ending, which sort of leaves us wondering what happened next. They left, they were terrified, they were amazed, and as Frederick Buechner says, it seems like the Gospel of Mark ends mid-sentence. It's almost as if Mark left the story for us to finish. In the longer ending of Mark, it fills in some of the blanks. They went, they told others, they all went, continued the ministry of Jesus. But we do well to remember the shorter ending, where the story is left up to us to finish. Because when we face bad news, the violence of fear, the doubt of uncertainty, the vicious cycle of poverty, the dangers of careless speech, and the misuse of power, we can overhear ourselves say, "How are we going to roll the stone away?" But on this day, on Easter morning, we remember what God has already done. That God has already rolled the stone away, and the love of Christ has been unleashed, and it is out there at work in this world. That it is easy to name the bad news. The harder way is to go looking for the love of Christ. It is, as Parker Palmer writes, it takes no special talent to see what's ugly, numbing, and death-dealing in our world. But staying aware of what's good, true, and beautiful calls us to open our eyes, minds, and hearts, and to keep them open. It is the harder way. But if we simply go from this place with spices in hand and our eyes and minds and hearts open, we just might catch a glimpse of Easter, where we can participate in how the story of Easter continues to happen. Amen.